My name is Rory Thompson, and by background, I'm an internal medicine physician and a health policy researcher with a focus in population health innovation. And next year, I will be joining the Advanced Research Project Agency for Health, better known as ARPA-H. This year, my research is focused on surveying the regulatory landscape for artificial intelligence in health. So I was thrilled to be able to witness Dr. Patel. And I'm also really excited about our next panel, which is on Health.AI. And I'm sure everyone here has heard breathless media accounts about how AI will change all sorts of aspects of our life. And when it comes to Health.AI, this really may not be an exaggeration. Artificial intelligence has the potential to change the way that we discover new medicines and treatments, the way that doctors make clinical decisions, and the way that patients understand and engage with their healthcare. But of course, there's also novel risks, especially in the areas of data privacy and safety, bias, and patient safety. So for good or ill, the ultimate impact of artificial intelligence in healthcare will in large part depend upon the health policies that regulate and incentivize its use. And to lead our discussion, we have the perfect moderator, Rohini Kosoglu, who has been a leading voice at the intersection of technology, economic, and social policy. She has had senior positions in both the White House and in Congress. She currently serves as a policy fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, a venture partner at Fusion Fund, and director of policy and public affairs at the Stanford Biodesign for Biodesign, which we are so grateful to receive her education. So I'd like to welcome up on the stage Rohini and the AI panel.
Hi, everyone. So as Rory said, we are at a critical moment in time in this conversation about healthcare and artificial intelligence. There's so many questions on the table that people have been discussing throughout the day and even in our last presentation. But at the heart of this, we're talking about some really important things like when we talk about healthcare and AI, is it safe? How can I trust it? Is it going to increase health disparities? Is it going to exacerbate them, or is there opportunities to reduce them? And what does the future look like for patient privacy in the context of this conversation about healthcare and AI? There's so many more we can touch upon, but I'm so excited to have such an esteemed panel on stage today. To my right, first in line is Russell Wald, who's Deputy Director at the Stanford Center for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. Then we have Lana Feng, who's the CEO of Huma.AI, which is a leading generative AI platform around life sciences. Ramin Bastani, who's CEO of Healthvana, which is a mobile patient engagement platform. And Robin Strongin, who's Senior Director at the National Consumers League and also leading their health policy practice. So I actually am just going to go in order of the questions that I had because, even though you guys aren't seated according to it, I think it would make for sort of a more fruitful discussion. So, Ramin, I'm going to turn to you. Why did you start Healthvana, and what, as you're using artificial intelligence, how are you using it to leverage patient needs?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So Healthvana is a technology company meant to help patients. I ended up starting the company after helping my dad as a caregiver for a number of years before he passed away from lung cancer. And so we've all had experiences in healthcare that aren't great. And a lot of the technology just sucked. And my background is in technology. And so the idea was to create technology that helps make lives better for patients. And we've helped deliver 60 million records to patients across the country. We've been at this for about a decade, and we're the leaders in sexual health specifically, COVID and some other areas. But what we're doing currently in AI is we're solving a problem. And the problem was the providers we're working with are busy. They're slammed. They can't hire fast enough. And so when patients would send messages through the portal to the providers, a lot of times they would go unviewed. Not even unread. I mean, unresponded to, but unviewed. So the first use case of AI that we built on top of OpenAI and ChatGPT is to respond to patients instantly. So no human in the loop, which may be controversial for some, but instant responses to patients. And currently it's deployed across 15 states, and you have thousands, tens of thousands using the AI currently, and it's going pretty well.
So on that note, as you're engaging with patients, I'll turn to you, Robin. So you've been advocating on behalf of consumers, patients in this whole conversation. What are some of the things that keep you up at night, or things that, as you've been talking with so many different stakeholders in this space, what are some of those things that are really top of mind to you?
So from what I read, a lot of the big tech entrepreneurs are survivalists. And some of them are buying these islands and stockpiling water and planes and even the blood of young people, which I think is a big mistake. If I were stockpiling anything, it would be Keith Richards or Willie Nelson's blood. And the other problem with this scenario is data don't lie. And a very unfortunate percentage of those folks on the island are going to be diagnosed with dementia in the not too distant future, and the numbers are even worse in California. It's the state with the highest number of people with dementia. But the good news is we're doing something about it, and the relevant news is AI can be very, very helpful to this. And so rather than bore you with where my organization is on issues like privacy, we're for it, unbiased algorithms, we're vehemently for it, and so on and so forth, I want to issue two challenges here today. First, to all of you AI people in the room who actually do AI, and this is, not something I can speak to, but I will, because I spoke to experts. So the first challenge to all of the AI technology people, there's a lab out in Long Island in Stony Brook, and one of the neuroscientists is doing work on what's called differential diagnosis for dementias. Not all dementia is Alzheimer's. And the issue is there is undiagnosed numbers, really low numbers of the different dementias. And this is a problem for the patients because low numbers mean low incentive for researchers and life science companies to try to do something about it. Well, in this lab, let me get this right, they are investigating, and Bakul talked to this earlier, how imaging relates to clinical physical exams and functional studies. So they're developing the experimental constructs which yield the data AI can train on. And I'm just, in the interest of time, not going to give you the whole big to-do that my new neuroscientist friend gave me, but he is like a node in a big global network of nodes. So my challenge to the Stanford labs and everybody else doing this, and let me also say this is personal for me. My husband's living with very advanced Lewy body dementia, which is what Robin Williams had, and then killed himself. So the challenge is, how do you find this neuroscientist? How do you find the others? But here's the catch. Here's what keeps me up at night. Back to my organization's advocacy, you need to be able to connect with my neuroscientist and make sure he has the proper IP protections, that the voice of the patient's included, that the research is diverse, and the algorithms are unbiased. It's a tall order. Which brings me to my second challenge today, and then I'll go back to you, so bear with me. Think of it as Sand Hill meets Capitol Hill or Davos in DC. We heard all of the panelists this morning talked about the insane complexity in healthcare. Everybody has a lens through which they want to solve the policy issues. We know that AI is both inside healthcare and outside healthcare. So what is some Hill staff person or someone at FDA with a lot of jurisdictional mishigas supposed to do? How do we get them out of that mindset to be able to come together and really think about the new definitions, the new metrics for progress? We don't even know what we're going to be discovering. And we want to make sure that whatever the regulators and policymakers are doing, we're allowing for the innovation while putting up the protection that we know consumers and patients need, because this stuff is already happening. We don't want to miss the opportunities for the unmet need, but we know there are crappy people doing crappy things out there. And in fact, just yesterday, 2 Stat News reporters were finalists on the for the Pulitzer for the work they did with United Health Group and how poorly they used AI to deny care. So these really are the issues that keep us up? How do we do the big thinking and get really creative and get out of the usual, this is what my responsibility is, these are the 3 rules I have to, I mean, that's reality, and I get that and I appreciate it. Been hearing these conversations for 40 years now, but now my husband's dying. So I'm like really on fire. So I will turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, on that note, Russell, let me turn to you. I mean, we always talk about, everybody for so many years is always like, we need the government to collaborate with the private sector. We need the private sector to collaborate with academia. Everybody's for that. What are some of, in your opinion, some of the risks if we don't get the collaboration right?
Yeah, I think to build on a little bit what Robin said as well, I think it's really important to note that in 2014, this historic field of academia AI has this shift. And what happens is industry starts to see what can happen with this, and they start to apply a large amount of resources to be able to make that happen. And that includes compute and data. So right now, not one university in the United States could train a ChatGPT model. It's impossible. It took over 10,000 GPUs to train ChatGPT is the best estimate that we think we have, and that's for the earlier versions. Stanford's world-class natural language processing group has 64 GPUs. Princeton is celebrating itself and patting itself on the back right now because it secured 300 GPUs, where Mark Zuckerberg and Meta have said that they want to secure 350,000 GPUs. So what you're talking about is such a huge disparity that what's happening here is academia does not have a seat at the table, and it needs to. It begs the question, does frontier AI belong in the university system? And I would argue not only does it must be in the university system because of a few critical reasons. One, what you get from academic research in this space. So a lot of what you were just talking about will come more from academia, not from industry. So think of curiosity-driven science, not profit-motivated driven science. That gives you things like GPS, the internet, right? There was no, you would have been dead by the time you saw a return on investment. The second thing that I would say here is who's going to train the next generation. And I'm not talking about just the next generation of model developers. I'm also talking about who's going to train the regulators. If they don't understand how this technology works, they can't be able to do it. And if we wake up one day and there's only an open AI university and that's all we have to turn to, that's going to be a problem for us. 3, we see a brain drain happening in the university. We actually did our own analysis of this, and it was quite chilling for us to see this. Of Stanford's core tenured AI faculty since 2013, we've lost a third of them. Only 1 retired, the rest went to industry. That is a very disturbing trend. And then the fourth important part about this is the institute that I work at, we've done a lot of incredible contributions to the governance of this technology and informing policymakers. And we've been mighty given the resources we have. But nevertheless, if you want another kind of independent organization like academia to be able to help understand how these models work, the architecture of them, and to be able to inform policy on the governance of this. So it's fundamental that academia has a seat, and in order for academia to have a seat, what we need to do is look into see where government's going to have to help buttress that up a little bit so that there is a more robust academic AI.
That's great. And we have seen industry also say that they're not opposed to this, that they are for the increases to the university in terms of the collaboration and resources.
It's not a zero-sum game.
Not a zero-sum game. Lana, to you, I mean, probably one of the biggest things that people, when they talk about healthcare and AI and what they're most excited about, actually not even just healthcare people, but across sectors, when people say, oh, what are they most excited about in AI, we often hear about people's excitement over the potential for breakthroughs, insights in the healthcare space that we can better learn about treatment and diseases. Talk to us a little bit about what made you start Huma.AI and sort of how you're thinking about it moving forward in this time and space.
So I spent over 20 years in precision medicine, so always kind of in oncology space, in the life sciences, trying to kind of deliver the targeted best medicine for cancer patients. So if you look at life sciences role in healthcare, right, you have the stakeholders, providers, payers, patients, and of course life sciences companies, right? Without innovation in new medicine or new technologies, then you're kind of missing that big pillar. So this is important for our healthcare system. And secondly, I think I'm okay. And secondly is data, right? When we talk about data is, we talk about interoperability, but 80% of the healthcare data is unstructured, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're in the healthcare system, I see a lot of people nodding their head, or life sciences companies. We basically use experts manually curating, reading papers, reading this to kind of get the insights or evidence we're talking about, right? So my experience, I was head of pharma at Genoptics and was acquired by Novartis. All of a sudden, the clinical trials were managing into the hundreds, right? So it's really untenable to rely on experts like myself manually curating that data. So we started Huma.AI as basically an NLP company using transformers from Google in 2018 to can we accelerate this or automate this process? And then along came generative AI. So our journey with Gen AI is actually quite early on. So I'm excited to share our experience here about responsible AI, how to scale it. So we were building our own models and it was not really working. So we got introduced into OpenAI. So we basically started experimenting with, DaVinci, GPT-3, 3.5, and all of a sudden you see this transformative change, right? So we were able to actually validate and deploy a evidence insight platform for several kind of medical affairs clients in pharma in Q4 of 2022 as ChatGPT, as OpenAI launched ChatGPT. So really has lots of experience to see, can we create the evidence that needed to push new medicine or new technology forward to benefit patients, right? Our first panel talked about basically, you don't have the evidence to support a payment, therefore there's no insurance payment, then patient can have access to that. So it's really a critical piece of the entire ecosystem.
But just on that note, so talk to us about walk us through how if we were to put something, and we were your client, and we were to put something into Huma.AI, how would it work in terms of what insights it could pull?
Okay, so I can give a really simple example, right? It's the scientific literature review. So scientific literature review is, you use it for discovery work, you use it for preclinical feasibility, right? Before you put medicine in the first patient, you need to know what is the prevalence of a disease. Is this the right patient we're running a trial? Throughout clinical trial, also in medical, to kind of engage with HCPs to basically focus on, are there any concerns on side effects, right? How do you actually give that patient to the target give that medicine to the target patient? And then of course, commercial post-market surveillance and pharmacovigilance is really important, right? It's approved. What about phase 4? What about real world data? So these are all really, really critical insights. It typically takes an expert some days, weeks to go through that scientific literature, right? If I want to say, what are the side effects of a catheter, right? Good example. So you can't just basically put 5 papers into ChatGPT, right? And then basically ask it. And of course, you're asking for citations. I like to say, ChatGPT is a people pleaser. Even though they don't know citations, you ask for citations, it's going to hallucinate, right? It's going to give you citations, but they're not real. So what we've done is basically build this at scale, being able to, you ask a question like side effects for particular catheter from AdWords or what have you. You'd be able to crawl the entire publication, the scientific sphere, right? From PubMed Central, even from some of the, Science Direct, be able to surface hundreds of relevant publications and be able to use the sort of this responsible AI platform to be able to give you those kind of summaries and key takeaways, and then take another layer of generative AI, so allows you to just pull insights, connect the dots from only those relevant hundreds of publications. So it's really, we're seeing results you could not, because of the insights that they can get in minutes, that they had to take weeks to get now, and also the insight you couldn't get before, right? Trying to think about connecting the different data sources. So it's really exciting.
That's great. Ramin, back to you. So you have such an interesting patient population that's been engaging on the platform. It's obviously accessible to everyone, but the data you're collecting is so rich because there's user experience, there's direct patient experience. Talk to us, as as so many people in the room are so interested in some of these issues around bias, getting at how to make these algorithms better trained on better patient data. Talk to us a little bit about your relationship with that.
Yeah, of course. So these are sexual health clinics across the country, and we're publishing a study shortly with some folks from Stanford, the former head of the White House for HIV, and the largest HIV/AIDS organization in the country. So this is a perfect use case where you can get from an AI non-judgmental information. Here's how it would work if anyone wanted to use it. It would be a part of the clinical workflow, so we already have the portal as a part of these clinics. Now you have the option, and I want to make that super clear, it's the option for the patient to use the AI. And so we announced this back on December 1st on World AIDS Day. We asked 50,000 patients we already work with, would you be interested in this? We wanted to know, would they be interested in using something like this to help them? We were shocked that 50% said yes. Of those 25,000, 70% come from communities of color. So these are really good indications for us of kind of what was happening. And if you remember, I talked about the problem before, a lot of patients weren't hearing back from their provider. So right now, of the number, I think it's 70% of the messages to the AI are from communities of color. So that's counter a lot of what we hear about, the gap widening. It will in some cases, of course. We're hoping to shrink it, especially for those communities that are disproportionately affected by the different disparities within HIV and such. And so if you're a patient, you have the option. Do you want to message your provider as you normally do? Do you want to message a standard AI that we've built on top of OpenAI and built a lot of the guardrails that I think you mentioned and tested it out for a very long time? Or number 3, do you want to talk to a drag queen AI? And that, shockingly, has had 80% of the patients that are using this are choosing that. And you imagine why. You're talking about your health, which is sensitive. It's scary. There's a lot of anxiety involved in all you do. So if you can just make it a little bit more lighthearted, we know that makes a huge impact on patients. And so the conversations are astonishing. They range from things that are as funny as, I think I showed you all earlier, a patient wrote in and said, is it raining men? And the AI came back and said, well, if it is, good for you. But metaphorically speaking, you should think about your health, and if you're having a lot of fun, here are the things to do. So it's always geared to bring it back. And it's not medical advice. This is meant to always point back to the provider for something like that. Then you have serious ones where you have people that are very high risk of getting HIV asking the first question, not even like basic back and forth. The first question was, I have a complicated relationship with sex, and sometimes I do things I don't want to. And this person had 17, this person's under the age of 20, 17 back and forth with the AI immediately, and it led into some mental health suggestions and broadly what's happening and how to best protect themselves if their partner is HIV positive. It's these kinds of use cases that we're seeing that are blowing us away, and we were quite skeptical as a team because we want to measure. We're mostly software engineers. We have a team that deeply cares about helping patients, and so we're less concerned about the hallucinations that you mentioned given the guardrails. But by the way, who's built their own GPT in the room? There's one person. It would take you 5 minutes on OpenAI if you have a Teams version, and it's all to you, and it's not difficult to do. You can put in the things you want. It gets more difficult when you use an API and you start to really train it. We think there'll be about 100,000 people using this in the next couple of months with us. Is that?
Yeah. Robin, over to you. So as you've sort of been studying the patient privacy aspect in this interaction, and obviously touched upon it as well, what are your thoughts on, how this conversation will flow amidst different points of like human in the loop, human on the loop, access and balancing innovation, all of that?
Well, for us, we try to focus on the positive and the opportunities that there are. And when you look back at data, a lot of what was said this morning with interoperability, the vast majority of the players are trusted and really trying to do the right thing. Ramin and I go back a really long way. I really follow what he's doing because there is the integrity is there, but we have to protect when there isn't. And it's an opportunity to teach specifically, you talked about equity and diversity and privacy and all of that. Well, clinical trials, for the longest time, the gold standard were healthy middle-aged white men. It's only recently that we acknowledge that pregnant women need to be in clinical trial, people of color. We are so far from that. It's an opportunity to use AI as the catalyst to not just correct for the future, but to correct for some of these sins of the past, if you will. And so we're working really hard on all of that and bringing in data safety. We do follow the Coalition of Health AI. We follow OECD. There is no shortage of principles to be had. The challenge is putting the principles into action. People send me oaths that they can give to their physicians who can take an oath to be ethical. I know that Michelle Mello just won a PCORI grant to include ethics into health AI. And there's a quote in there about bringing the patient voice in. I think that's great, really important, but I would say it doesn't go far enough. I would like to see the AI developers on the 6th floor on the dementia unit where Brian lives, because it's not enough to hear, let alone from the patients in dementia. Of course, it's a dyad. It would be me doing the talking. But there's a lot that goes on in real time that is being missed. And across clinics, so I think there's so much opportunity. You had mentioned all of I know there's a boot camp to do the education, academia can lead. You know, that's a chance to bring all of the stuff we know to be true on all these issues into the AI conversation. We see it as an opportunity, and it's not just the providers. I would say it's also for the people in the judicial system, because they're going to be litigating a lot of this, and they need to be educated as well.
Can I
Yeah,
build on one quick point too? When we're talking about data, we actually did a study. It's a little bit older, 2020, and so I don't have the correct number here, but proportionally, the amount of healthcare algorithms that are in use today is extraordinarily disproportionate to 3 states: California, Massachusetts, New York. So you're not taking into account all of the other the health factors that come in from rural communities or any of these other significant, key aspects. And our data sets are being built off of those 3 states, yet we're going to use these algorithms that are going to be across the nation. And I think that's a really key part that we're missing.
Agreed.
That's exactly right. Lana, before we go to audience questions, do you have anything else you want to share on that, how you all work through some of these issues like bias and patient privacy?
I want to really emphasize expert in the loop. I know Ramin has a slightly different view. So, there are a lot of concerns about generative AI, right? Is it, it's going to share my information? Is it hallucination? And also the transparency, right? So what we've done and what we've seen is that, from our perspective, it doesn't make any sense for us to build our own large language model, right? Like Russell, you said, it's like this is like kind of an arms race, and a lot of people are left out. So, so what we decided to do really is build a platform, sort of building elements around LLMs to make it responsible, to make it accurate, to make it transparent. So how we did that is through expert in the loop. If you look at historically, right, the GPT models, particularly GPT 3.5 and 4, were so much better, at least at the beginning, was that OpenAI used expert in the loop, used the reinforced learning through human feedback, right? You heard in the news that they employ people in Africa to kind of take the output from the language model and see is this right or not. So this is a really high level example of kind of human in the loop. So then of course now everyone is using this approach to train their large language models. So same concept, right? So we have expert in the loop, and you'll be able to continue to ask questions. Again, going back to the scientific literature review, right? Anytime you ask a new question, adding a bunch of new publications relating to what you care about in terms of evidence, that kind of base evidence hub gets smarter. So it's very much this expert making it more advanced, making it kind of tailored to a domain, to the questions, to the evidence you care about. Really, I think I can't emphasize enough.
Great. Okay, so time for audience questions. But before we go, Russell, do you want to give a shout out about the boot camp to any staff in the room? I don't know if the applications have closed.
No, they're still open,
Okay.
I think, actually. So for over a decade, I have actually worked on some of these, but within Stanford. We initially started with cybersecurity, but then we rolled over into AI, and what we've done is had an AI boot camp for congressional staff. And it's really important because we take a bipartisan, bicameral set of staff out to Stanford. We could do it here. It would not have the same effect. It's sponsored travel, so it's 72 hours is the longest we get to have them on the ground. but it's very impactful because our goal is not to teach you how to build a model. That's not worth your time nor ours. What it is to teach you some of the fundamentals of the technology, its impact on society, and what it can and cannot do, and to give yourself those types of resources that you can pull on it when you come back onto the Hill to make critical decisions in the space. And in fact, some of the success stories over the years, one of the best ones I've ever heard was how a Senate staffer reached out to a House staffer when they had a question, whom they had never known each other. They have this conversation, and she makes an amendment on a bill to restore something that was stripped out before, and they were both of different parties. They only met each other on this type of trip and were able to engage and have this conversation. So it's not just networks within the, relying on Stanford faculty to be able to help. It's also internal networks that happen around these subjects, and I think it's a really good opportunity for people to learn more and build more their skill set.
And we'll be there. But, okay. Audience questions. Any questions?
Maybe while waiting for questions, one thing I wanted to share about the privacy aspect, I think it's not one size fits all. So there's different layers, and that's a lot of, the regulators have an impossible task. I do not envy the role they're trying to play in trying to do this, and it's going so fast, faster than I've ever seen. But in our case, it's going to actually hurt underserved patients. In some use cases, if you force a human in the loop to get back to you by way of a patient portal, for example, because then the physician has to look at it, the staff has to look at it, figure out whether it's the right one. And there's a study that just came out showing it actually takes them longer when they do that. That's not going to make physicians happy or their staff. So it's all size dependent.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So I do some work in this space with my own startup, but I think there's a natural tension between the arms race, which is happening and accelerating. I mean, to the point where like really well-funded startups like Inflection had to fold and go into Microsoft basically. And then at the same time, this thoughtful approach that has guardrails and experts in the loop. So how does healthcare manage this tension where you've got these foundational models which are looking for massive distribution advantages right now? Some companies are being built on these models, right? There's a lot of AI transcription companies out there that are basically built on ChatGPT 4, 3.5 or 4. And then at the same time having like the thoughtful guardrails, hyper-specified models that do no harm. Because these two things are inherently in tension, and usually economics wins. So how do you all manage that, and where do you see the future of this going? Especially in healthcare, which is like a very highly regulated industry with a lot of second and third order effects that can be harmful.
That was my second challenge, was to the regulators. How do you come together to do things in real time, to think really innovatively? It's almost, what did you guys have in California? Y Combinator, which is like a startup for policy ideas. And how can you create something that's flexible and durable and test it? Smaller ski can't just go broad distribution if you don't know what the safety parameters are, but you can have a way. I don't know what it is. That's why it's a challenge. But I think there needs to be exactly what you're talking about, where you can test some things and learn from it in real time. It's just, so much is happening so quickly, and we can't not mention Kara Swisher in a conversation like this. And, she quoted in Burn Book, the French philosopher, what was his name, Paul Virilio, when you build the ship, you build the shipwreck. When you build the plane, you build the plane crash. So we have AI, we need to know what that is. We don't have the luxury of waiting because it's here. So I agree, but I think that's the challenge. How do we get the right people together to put down the jurisdictional guardrails and let a few things out there and learn from it in the best way that we can? No, I think we need to encourage that innovation. That was my challenge number 2.
I'll answer that question. It's a real problem.
Yeah.
Right. So you see this funding. It is the key of this, and you see large language model. That's mostly, if you look at AI landscape in terms of investment, that's where it got most of the dollars, right? And then folks like us who apply those foundation models to a vertical like healthcare, right? Responsible AI and this and that. So that's the funding is not there. It's not because of like there's no utility, right? It's because the generative AI landscape is moving so quickly. Investors is almost like paralyzed. It's like, oh, are you guys going to be replaced by OpenAI, right? For example, OpenAI just announced like they're working with Moderna So where does that leave Microsoft? So I think this defensibility issue is a huge problem even for the big guys, right? So wait and see. I think for startups, hang in there.
Who should fund that, though? Who should do the funding of that?
A venture capitalist, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you kind of encapsulated in your question the entire conundrum of AI policy right now, because we could sit here and dissect that question for hours and talk about what it means for the open source community and what, there was Llama 3 was talked about earlier in the previous conversation and what happens with that. I think that one of the most important things that I could narrow down here is any talk of regulation must be paired with investment. There must be public sector investment. If we don't have that,
It's not
even if you came up with the optimal regulations today that held industry's feet to the fire but still let them innovate, you would not be able to enforce it because you don't have enough regulators who understand the technology to go in. Europe is struggling with this right now, trying to secure 100 regulators to be able to do this. I doubt Europe has 100 people who truly understand how foundation models work and could effectively do that and would be willing to go into government. We have to expand out the pool more significantly, and that's probably only going to come from government making the investment into a greater public sector AI ecosystem. If we don't do that, we will not be able to effectively regulate, and what you're just going to see is a lot of regulatory capture by the top.
Russell said that was very well put. Any other questions?
Thanks, Rebecca. So there's a recent article in JAMA where a bunch of investigators utilized AI to create a series of incredibly fictional articles with pictures and data that was intentionally misinformed. I mean, they actually instructed it to sort of relay misinformation. A lot of our conversations today, everyone here, I'll just declare, are good actors. We're trying to use AI for good. But clearly it's a tool that can be used for other purposes, which could be actually quite bad. So I'll go back to the question that I was asking about before to all of you, how do we control, let's say, the worst case scenarios? What are those worst case scenarios, and how do we sort of get in front of it before we're confronted with some reality that we can no longer control because the Pandora's box has been opened?
Anyone want to take?
I think we have to be very careful when we're looking at risk and what risk is and what's immediate risk and what is long-term future risk. So when we're talking about these kind of having these conversations in the AI space, a meteor took out the dinosaurs and it could take us out. I don't sit here worried about every day. And I'm just trying to get more to that X risk side that a lot of people have spent an enormous amount of time focused on versus fighting and boiling the ocean of risk. I think we need to be very focused on what those immediate type of risks are. I think one part is that is the misinformation, disinformation side and how that will propel out it's what we see from our own studies is it can be extraordinarily convincing. It can be very powerful. We know that it's there. Initially, for example, this is more on a political risk side, I guess I would say. I was concerned about deep fakes, but I always said that's a platform problem. That's not because is that an AI problem? Yeah, there's more speed, sophistication, and scale of these. But that still rests with the platforms because they disseminate that. Then came the Biden robocall, and for those who don't know about that, in New Hampshire there was a robocall from Biden with Biden's voice that changed that. That removed the platform and went directly to people's phones. So we're in this part of where, for example, another thing is a parent being called in the middle of the night from their child that says I've been kidnapped. And if you don't give this person $10,000 and wire it right now, they're going to kill me. And they're screaming and crying, and they're probably in their dorm room safe with no issue. So I think what we're going to start having are moments of this. And I think there was a car example might have been brought up at one point. When automobiles first came out, there was lots of risk or things that we saw consistently. And we had to learn how to adapt to each one to an extent. I learned a few years ago that, car hoods crumple when you get into a head-on collision, and there's a reason for that, because they used to not, and then they decapitated the people behind that. So I think that this is going to be a whole of society of where we're going to have to start looking at what those types of risks are, and every day there's going to be a new one that was revelatory to us that didn't happen before. If we're going to talk about things from a policy perspective, I think one thing that we need to do is the government needs to look into setting up some type of incident reporting situation here. By having incident reporting, we'll be able to capture and see where risks are and what's happening in the space a little bit more effectively, and find out maybe it's coming from the same model, and we can actually try to do something specific towards that or mitigate that. So a good example of that is the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. Anytime the smallest thing happens on an airplane, for example, a screw coming off and a door popping out midair, it landed a lot of planes, they grounded them, they had to go and they had to look and see specifically, are these safe, and we're able to manage that through that process. But there's just this multi-factor level of risk that we're going to have to be able to navigate, and as a society, and be careful about that. And we're going to have to get much more user educated on some of these things and what we're doing and what we see and what happens to us.
But I do think it's important to note that we're at this very unique moment in time. I mean, we're having bipartisan conversations about this issue of AI across sectors, and we really have not, it's May 2024, we really have not delved into what many people have experienced in DC, which is like this regulatory reaction to something very bad that has happened to consumers. So I think all the points you made are great, and it is something I've thought to myself as well. Like when you go shopping for a car, you do check the safety ratings, and we have that in place. But people had to come together at some point in time to actually say, we're going to have this body that actually certifies and signs off on it. Anyone else?
Yeah, please.
I'll say something real quick. I think we sometimes, when it comes to generative AI, because there's so much hype or about it, right? We have a kind of emotional reaction. But if you think about it, it's really, there's a human in the center of it, right? Either it's using it for good, to make it more accurate, transparent, or using prompts to kind of, intentionally doing something fake, right? So I really think, I like to call it, it's kind of the Wizard of Oz, the guy in the back controlling it. There's a general capability, but how do we use it responsibly, right? So that's my take.
I'll take another position here. The risk is that we actually keep the status quo in healthcare. The people that are underserved that we work with, the majority of the folks we've worked with for a long time, whether it's with partners like the County of Los Angeles that has 10 million people, they're not thinking about these things we're talking about, and it's good that there's really smart people that are. They just want better care and someone to be responsive in some way that actually helps them and their family in a way that isn't terrible. We get caught up in these conversations that sound so high level. We're working with these people every day. We have for a long time. The risk is actually that we don't do and start to work and iterate towards ways that actually helps patients. Now, the problem is with investors, in my view, venture doesn't get rewarded fast enough in healthcare. Therefore, it hasn't been beneficial overall as an area. It doesn't make money in the way that other areas have. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope AI is completely different and can change that dynamic. But the patient is not the payer. And so you're constantly looking for ways. We think about it as threading the needle as a company. How do we actually help people without feeling bad about what we do? We don't care about revenue cycle management at all. We want to help people as much as we can.
So just, I think a lot of the conceptual framework over the last few panels has been that AI is sort of in the cloud. And as you've seen, Apple just announced their M4 chip is moving to the iPad. There's going to be more of this. The expansion of dynamic RAM on device, it's going to mean that, Llama 3 is just the start of this. It's all going to move to on device. And I mean, that means that individual people are going to have a full doctor on their phone that's not connected to the internet at some point in, let's say, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. How does all this regulation work in that kind of a ecosystem that we're heading to extremely fast?
Good luck. I mean, right now we're relying on self-policing, right? Like we work with clients, they always want validation, what have you, publish. But then I just think, I hope regulators can move fast enough.
I think it is really challenging in the sense, like, the healthcare side has been, you have, our current healthcare sector, and then you also have the people with the resources, the largest tech companies in the world, also trying to pursue what to do around healthcare. And then you also have regulators that, I think to Russell's point, they're not in this every day in terms of understanding the latest and how fast this is moving. I do think, though, we hear from a lot of members of Congress that are very nervous about, like, just sort of saying, oh, this has to happen like this, because they're worried about the innovation piece. But the flip side is, again, I think for everybody on this panel, that there's something bad that will really happen, and then you have to rush to then regulate in a way that isn't always good. But I do think that, yes, currently, as it was stated before, I mean, this is also a resource issue, and who has the resources in this space? Anyone? No? Okay, that's all we'll listen to. Yes, one more.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating. Curious, as a extension of the previous question, whether you think there's a role, and I know it's a new frontier and a pioneering idea, but is there a role for self-regulation? Do you think the industry itself could come together? Because those are the people who understand the details of both, sort of the balance really of innovation and regulation, probably better, I hate to say it, than our legislators or our regulators. And because we've really never done something like this before, maybe we people like this wonderful panel, consider how to maybe do that through associations or other bodies that are outside of the normal regulatory channels.
We would be very nervous about that, because we've seen how AI is a barrier with prior authorization, with step therapy, with denying coverage for people. And if you allow, I'll just say it, insurers and PBMs to self-regulate how they use it, we would be very nervous about that and would be very loudly objecting.
I would take issue with self-regulation too, and I say that because we annually publish a report. It's called the AI Index. It's this kind of preeminent report that measures AI. One thing that we've seen from a lot of these foundation model providers and what they've been able to do in this particular space is they're not benchmarking on the same standards.
Right.
So how can they self-regulate even themselves if we don't have a baseline level of measurement? It's not tenable. And I think it actually, and for something that will be so integrated into our society, to have rely exclusively on the developer to be self-regulate is not one that I think is going to work well. And if we don't have a baseline level of measurement, then we're even in more trouble.
There are frameworks like CHAI, and there's a bunch of groups bringing together a bunch of industry to talk about this while working with regulators. It's not necessarily full self-regulation, I think, which is maybe what you were asking, but it's at least bringing folks together at the table to talk about the largest companies. We're a tiny company. There's companies, like you mentioned, that can buy GPUs that is going to cost $100 billion. So those decisions are going to come at a different level.
Not you yet.
I think we have time for one more.
Rohini, maybe this question is for you, because you've worked on Capitol Hill. What do you think is going to be a realistic pathway of what happens? Because you've talked about reactionary model. This is very historical, right? Historical precedent over and over again. What do you think is actually going to happen?
Okay, well, I guess I'll get to be the forecaster. Okay, so, from all of our conversations, I think, at least with staff, with members, their biggest issue is first coming from the patient themselves. I think exactly to the examples Robin has pointed out. What does it mean when a senior is in a nursing home and the algorithm says, they're fine to go home and no one has actually seen them, the United Healthcare example. Or maybe it's not United, it was a different company. But there are going to be examples where there's direct patient harm. And I think state AGs are also thinking about that too, from a very consumer-facing front. On the flip side, and I think this is what's really challenging about Capitol Hill in general, which is you also have technology staffers themselves that are solely just looking at AI, and they're being asked to cover across financial sector, healthcare sector, and figuring out how to actually put into what are the right questions we even ask these companies? How do we hold them accountable? And the natural training is to usually use hearings for all of that, to sort of pull out those insights. But one thing that I know that everybody up on this stage has been thinking about is, really helping these members understand how to do this from a human-centered approach. How are we also learning from other sectors as well that have been using different examples? You know, we have versions of FDA auditing, we have versions of third-party auditing, we have Russell mentioned on the transportation side. There's examples where even Homeland Security, where they have to do public-private partnerships in cybersecurity. So there are some examples the government has about the ways to have some bipartisan conversations. I do think this is not going to be easy to sort of just jump in and regulate, but the one thing about this unique moment is that people are really open to having the conversation. We've not gone, you know, if you look across other sectors like social media data, companies won't share that data. It is very hard to analyze it. It's hard to get access to it. And so we don't want to be in that place where, you know, right now Stanford, many universities around the country get access to run tests to say your benchmarks aren't exactly the same. And so that's, I think, the hope at the underpinning of all of this is that in order to do the consumer-facing things that the staff and the members may want to move forward with, we also need to really move fast in terms of these conversations about sharing of data. Okay, with that, I'm supposed to tell you guys that we get a 5-minute break. And thanks to all our panelists.